University, and this is a session on hybrid work, what happens next. There's been a cataclysmic change over the past couple of years in the nature of work. In some ways, we've had more change in the first 20 weeks, starting in 2020, than we did in the previous 20 years. Some of my own research found that about 1 in 6 Americans was working at home at the beginning of that year, and by the middle of it, it was about 50%. And now that the pandemic, we hope, is beginning to recede, many people are going back to their workplaces, but I think work will never be the same. Some of these changes are going to be here to stay. We're learning new ways to interact with each other. Some of them may be more productive, but they're not affecting everyone evenly. So we've pulled together here at the World Economic Forum an expert panel to dive into this. Some of the people who've done some of the most interesting research on this area. Starting on the far left there is Lynda Gratton. She's a professor of management practice at the London Business School. Sitting next to her is Chano Fernandez. He's a co-chief executive officer of Workday. And then Christy Hoffman is the General Secretary at the UNI Global Union in Switzerland. And finally, Congressman Dan Meuser is the Congressman from Pennsylvania in the 9th District. So this session, true to its name, is going to be run in a hybrid session. I'm so glad that many of you can be here in person, but I know there are many more of you watching it online. And I have a tool here called Slido that will allow us to connect with you. It's all part of a broader session at a broader initiative at the World Economic Forum to understand the nature of work. And so we have if I can get the slide to advance here. Can we get that to click forward? Maybe not. We have an initiative on good, there we go. Okay, there we go, that's the one I wanted. So we have an initiative here on we call it the Good Work Framework, and there are 5 different pillars to it, all of which we're going to, I think, touch on to some extent today. But I'll bring special attention to the second and third one, flexibility and protection and delivering on health and well-being. Those are 2 areas where remote work can be especially beneficial. And as I mentioned, those of you who are online can send questions to me through this app, Slido. And I have a little iPad here. I'll read your questions. And if you want to use the hashtag #hybridwork, I'll get those questions directly to me, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. But let me now dive in with some of our experts here, and let me start with you, Lynda. You wrote this terrific book. It just came out 2 weeks ago, Redesigning Work. So make sure we get that on the camera. And I know you've been doing a lot of work in this area, and it'd be great to have you, just tell us a little bit about what your research has told us. You've been doing this for a long time, and now you've become kind of the go-to person for a lot of these questions. So why don't you frame up the issues of hybrid work? What are the big things we should be thinking about?
Okay, thank you so much, Erik. Well, Erik and I both chair the councils that have looked at work for many years at the WEF, and I think, there were big trends in play way before the pandemic. Demography, people were living longer. That meant they were working into their 70s. Technology trends, it meant people had to upskill all right the way through their life. And indeed, social trends. Many families now have 2 workers, full-time workers rather than 1. And we all felt that work wasn't working. And actually, Erik and you and I and many others have written extensively about that. When the pandemic started, I, as a psychologist, said, well, we know that within 60 days, people change their habits. So if this thing lasts for longer than 60 days, we'll all change our habits. Well, now, 2 years later, and I think we're learning a lot. We've learned about we've learned digital skills. We've changed our habits. We don't get on a train every single day. And also we've changed our aspirations. And that might be some of the reasons why we're getting this great resignation. So what's happening now? Well, what's happening now, in my view, would be you could sort of call it Series 2, Episode 3. I mean, there's still more episodes to come, and there might even be another series. And so I think we're all learning and experimenting. My view is that we need to be looking at a granular question which says, how do you make work more productive? How do you help people use both time and place to be more productive, and also to really focus on the moments that matter? For example, the young person who's just come into work, they need much more social interaction than others. I think the challenge right now is that it's being currently framed as a question between work versus home and how many days. I don't think that might be the question for Series 2, but it's not the question for Series 3. The question for Series 3 is, how do we help people be more productive? And now that we've learned so many new skills and actually got these fabulous technologies, how can we use that in service to bring people more flexibility? And we know that one of the real reasons we love work is because we have some autonomy, and we have autonomy because we're given some level of flexibility to make choices around.
Right, and certainly we see a lot more autonomy in many ways with people being able to work at home and sometimes even set their own hours.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned technology, so let's go to Chano. You're the co-CEO of Workday, a company that's done some amazing work bringing technology and helping understand human capital management. And in addition to productivity that Lynda mentioned, there are also questions of well-being, and both of those are important. Maybe you could say a little bit about what you're seeing already in terms of employee well-being and productivity.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Erik. Clearly a number of companies have moved hybrid now for quite some time, so there is some data and some learnings from it, right? In terms of productivity, I would say on average, many companies have experienced around 5% productivity increases. And it's clear that, this hybrid model, work employees really value flexibility, and that creates an increased job satisfaction. It is clear that the compressed schedules of AM, PM, compressed work hours, non-standard hours is something that provides a much better work-life balance, and they really appreciate that. And it was also interesting to hear that even it has had good and positive effects on physical health. Because, many of people working remotely, they're more active than they really when they need to spend time either on commuting or going to the office or subject to those schedules. But obviously, it has had an impact on well-being. Some of these on the positive side, right? Because the flexibility part and the more work-life balance has had a positive impact on well-being.
Right.
But clearly, we all as employers need to understand that we need to support, the employees' well-being, but we also need to train our people. And when I say people, people leaders and people managers on how they really need to manage and coach and guide on this new world, right? Obviously, it's not all being rosy, right? Clearly some people have feel fatigue, from very long days and many video conference calls.
Well, it may be hard
really
to put
feel
boundaries
disconnected
on your work.
a little bit. So it's kind of the question: how do we bring the best of both worlds, right? How do we bring that flexibility that workers are looking for, but how do we bring as well kind of that connectivity and those moments that matter, as Lynda is saying? How do we bring that together? Because we need to nurture and bond those connections, especially we need to foster, employee culture. And I think a very good way of doing it is really we as employers need to be listening and pulling continuously and understanding what our employees are expecting, and then how we are able to cope with those expectations and really to stay connected and engaged.
Okay. Well, let's go to Christy. So Chano mentioned the 5% productivity gains. He also said that not everyone's benefiting. There's some downsides. I know you've done a lot of work at the UNI Global Union on some of the inequities that have emerged and how the fact that not everybody is able to participate in that way. Maybe you could say something about that.
Well, I think let me look at two different issues here. In terms of not everyone participating, we have to recognize that the majority of workers must do their work in place. So whether it's if you're giving care or you're cleaning the hospital or you're selling groceries, that there's not an option for those workers to work remotely. So to the extent that we want to address their desire for better work. So what is that? Secure jobs, well compensated, safe, secure, and predictable. And the reality of having a predictable schedule enables you to organize your life in such a way that you could have more flexibility. You also need some paid time off, whether it's sick days or personal time. These are the kinds of things that we'd like to look at for the frontline workers, of which there are very, very many. Then for those in remote work, and setting aside for the moment, there's a large number of workers who will probably be full-time completely remote. Let's say, look at the work of call centers, for example. They have a whole nother set of issues involving surveillance. What is their compensation model? Are they paid only for those times when they're logging on? We see some extreme and egregious forms of surveillance for the full-time remote workers who don't tend to be as autonomous as we like to imagine hybrid work. And so I think those are a set of issues. And then for the hybrid workers, yeah, I mean, I'll agree that this is really what we sort of think, well, this is the ideal world, that we have this mix and match and we can decide when we come to work and when we don't. We're not actually seeing it as quite as in that way in terms of the workers we represent who are working remotely, let's say in the finance sector, in the ICT sector, IT sector. There are those who are project driven, and that's one kind of model. But otherwise, a lot of our employers, want you to be available for a fixed set of hours during the day, but that's fine. I mean, these are all things that are being negotiated in Europe to a large extent, where we have unions that are representing these workers in collective bargaining. We have actually collected 250 collective bargaining agreements to do some analysis of those. But the biggest, one of the bigger challenges we see is the never-ending workday. The fact that workers are working longer hours during the pandemic than they did in the past, and how do you put some guardrails around that? Because if you have total flexibility, you're also always at work. And there's nothing that can ruin your nice evening at home than a phone call from your boss that you're expected to take, which actually that is. So the right to disconnect for us is really critical. I think we also see some of the dangers that Lynda pointed out about concerning young workers not getting that opportunity for mentorship and networking that they need early in their career.
Work, yeah.
The community, and also women. Do we want women who tend to disproportionately choose remote work to be kind of isolated from the places where the real decisions get made and so on?
Right.
So there has to be intentional management.
Yeah, my colleague Nick Bloom looked at some of the people who chose to continue working at home and some who went in, and found that the people who stayed at home, there were some of the benefits we've heard about, but they're also less involved, less likely to be promoted. They weren't,
right,
in the mix of things. There's a lot of things that happen, in the hallways that aren't part of the formal structure of work. Let me go now to Congressman Meuser. And we've heard about some of the benefits and some of the costs for employees, but employers are also being affected. And in addition to being a congressman, you started and ran a small business, Pride Mobility. So you have a perspective both from the government side, but also the business side. Maybe you can tell us something about how hybrid work should be organized to be beneficial both for employees and employers.
Sure. Well, it's certainly been an extremely disruptive situation. From COVID to remote, to hybrid, to trying to create the balance for employers, to how to bring workers back and how essential that is. Heck, even this morning, when I heard this was hybrid, I had my shorts on. Was ready to go in front of my computer. And
you got the blue jeans, though.
I know. I still wasn't sure. I thought maybe we'd be
well, I'm glad you wore the pants.
We'd be panned up. Excuse the jeans, I know. But, even Congress has become hybrid. First time ever, U.S. Congress, I have to denote, we have proxy voting. That's never occurred before, just over the last.
Oh, so you can
years.
vote from home.
You can vote from home in the U.S. House, not in the Senate. The Senate did not go with proxy voting, and I'm not sure that's going to last all that much longer. But
do you think that's a good thing? Or?
Well, look, there's tradition. There's important things. You need to show up for work, so to speak. Now, during COVID, I could understand when you have those who are very vulnerable to the virus that are coming from on a regular basis, flying from Oregon and California and the Midwest. So I could relate, but I do think moving forward, we've really got to reevaluate that situation. But
like Lynda was saying, having people all together as well. Christy was saying, having people have a sense of community when they're together. Yeah.
Right, a sense of community, that camaraderie, working together, that collaboration, certainly. But even in committee meetings, we do it quite often now. And sometimes it's, you have operational issues, and you're trying to get things done, and yet some people are there, some people aren't. So, but the thing is this: when it comes to business, businesses must adapt to this. I mean, there are companies with customer service, technical service, heck, even some levels of engineering that they can't retain employees without having a hybrid offering, and so the adjustments need to be made. But again, that collaboration, as we discussed, is very important. There's downsides. The team building, culture, friendships developed. Heck, at my former company, about a dozen people over the course of 10 years got married to each other. So there's that, and there's upside. There's savings for businesses. It's remarkable how much business travel savings is
right,
is
even office
place.
space, right?
Certainly, well, not yet, because they still retain that and all. But it's even a little bit, and I mentioned this to you earlier, it's a little bit sad that there's a customer service area. I showed you, I asked a company in my district their thoughts in preparation for this, and they said, here, I'll send you a picture. He sent me 2 pictures where technical service once was and customer service with over 100 people, 50, 60 in each, and it's just empty.
Yeah.
And before it was a vibrating place of,
buzz.
Right, it had a buzz to it. So that's where the balance needs to be made. Businesses need to be smart, do what they can for employees, yet achieve a high level of excellence along the way.
Well, we are seeing some effect on rents already in both residential and commercial rents as people are kind of readjusting to where they're going to be living and working. And this point about camaraderie that a lot of you brought up in the community, that's something that isn't so easy to measure. So Chano, when you talked about the 5% productivity, there's some things that are very structured that you can say, okay, did you get the report in? Did you do a certain number of calls in your call center? But would any of you like to comment on what we may be missing by going to remote? In addition, is the serendipity of innovation and hallway conversations, is there less of that? Maybe you can start with that, Lynda.
It's really difficult at this moment in time to know that. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. The first is, when we think about how we used to work, we're looking at it in a very sort of rose-tinted glasses. We have this idea that we used to work so that everyone came into the office and they saw each other all the time and they had these wonderful conversations. The truth is, and Erik, you know this because there's been some amazing research on this, which looked at eye movements when people came into the office prior to the pandemic. This was a study before the pandemic. What it showed is most of us went into the office because it was open plan. It was far too noisy. We put our noise cancelling on, and we sat down and we did our emails. So let's be honest about what the office was. Open plan offices were never places of collaboration. That's, I think, the first point. The second point is, I don't think we yet know where technology is going. So, for example, PwC, Accenture, both onboarded their graduates using virtual reality this year. That's really interesting, and I don't think we quite know that. I personally feel that when it comes to creativity, and this again is a brand new piece of research, which you also will know, Erik, what it's showing is that in terms of creativity, ideation, the bit when you're coming up with new ideas, is better done outside a digital environment. It's better done in an environment like this where we can move our eyes around, we can see each other. But in fact, once you've had ideas and you're choosing them, it's perfectly fine to use a digital. So my view is that what we're going to move towards is more intentional design of work, where people say, we need to cooperate now, so let's go into the office. But that means we have to redesign offices, because an open plan office is not a place of cooperation. So I think one of the challenges that CEOs are facing right now is, how do you actually then redesign your office so that it allows people to do the things you want them to do, which is highly cooperative. Just one other point to mention, again, this is coming out of some of the research from companies like yours, Chandra, which is that the number of meetings we've had during this Zoom and Microsoft Teams era has doubled.
The number of meetings
has doubled. So the first thing that you have to do as a leader is get rid of the meetings. We've just suddenly started to work as if everything around productivity is having a meeting, having a Microsoft Teams meeting.
Right.
That's not the case.
All day long, yeah.
And what we've lost is that, so creativity, remember, has got two aspects to it. One is meeting other people. The other thing is focused work, where you're on your own. Exactly, Erik, the point you were making earlier. That's the bit that's completely disappeared.
Yeah.
People are not spending time on their own, thinking, imagining, being a human.
Well, I like what you're saying about how we have to reimagine, reinvent work.
Yeah.
And I see this in some of the CEOs I've talked to. Several of them have told me they're looking to have maybe 2 days a week, 3 days a week where people come in, 2 or 3 days where people are at home. But then when people come in, it won't be the same as it was when they come in. That's when they want to have people interacting with each other. When they're at home, maybe they're doing some of the more focused work. But that means that the layout of the office needs to be different. The structure needs to be different. So it's not just coming back and doing the same thing before. But yeah, Chano, maybe you can say, especially what you've been doing with some of the technology.
No, I think great observations. I completely concur. I think it's not just the layout. Clearly, the layout will help, no doubt about it. And we're all investing on this layout and try to be more creative and really even on the office, had that hybrid world of the new technology and the physical connections. But I think it's a lot as well about, the first and second line managers on training them, because we're talking about these moments that matter. And trust me, when I talk with them and we get feedback from our own technology, and we define them is for collaboration, networking, is, think about finance teams are better off together when they're closing the books, and maybe sales teams when they are, just closing the quarter, is when you're having brainstorming, strategy sessions, when you're having quarter business review, that's when you come together. But still, they need much more guidance and they need much more training on what are good outcomes look like and how you should be orchestrating that. Because we put kind of those philosophy and policies or frameworks onto the first, second line managers, and they don't really know what it is expected and what good looks like. So of course the physical space looks different, but we need to, really, train more.
Right.
And we are all learning how to do that. Yeah, it is for that nurturing and bonding and collaboration. And there is a great part we can do onboarding people through the metaverse, for example, as you were saying on Accenture. But they also need to learn the culture. I love that definition. Culture is how people behave when nobody's looking. Well, if that is one definition as good as any other, how are you going to get that through, video conferencing, right? You need to have some of those interactions, right? Listen, productivity is not also about black and white. Because, for example, very simple example, right? If I need to discuss 3 different topics that it may take me 1 minute to do, I'm not going to be setting a video conference call with you for 5 minutes because it looks, like I don't care about you. It looks weird. So maybe I'm going to have 3 different meetings, that will create more meetings for an hour and a half. If I'm in the office and the reason I have one question for you and one question for you and one question for you, maybe I'm solving it out through the corridor.
Yeah,
when I'm going for a coffee or just going to the toilet.
Yeah, we need to reinvent some of the technology.
So that brings productivity as well sometimes. So it's not as black and white, that is also more productive,
Well, Lynda mentioned some innovative things, even with virtual reality for training. Are there other technologies that you see emerging beyond, video conferencing that are being catalyzed by remote work, or that could be helpful?
All the collaboration technologies, video conference, clearly all the Slack channels and the Teams and the collaborations have really bring, employees' voices. We do have technologies for, again, getting good understanding on polls and the sentiment on what the employees are expecting from our employers. And they're becoming quite advocate there, but providing great guidance as well. We are, newer technologies, we are redesigning. They're very flexible and adaptable to redesign how the new world of work will look like. And for that, we're trying to rethink with, HR experts, what the new organizational design will look like, and how does that work. And honestly, we are all iterating and learning at this point in time.
Christy, how do you see these technologies evolve? You mentioned some of the surveillance technologies, but also in a way, some of these technologies may be more liberating. If they, how can we strike a balance, or better yet, push the technologies to be broadly beneficial and not detrimental to workers?
I'm not as familiar with the virtual reality technologies and how that could help to bring people together. I just did my little foray into the virtual technology here at the WEF for that little experience. But yeah, I mean, that is really the thing. We don't want technologies to be punitive, and that is that as I mentioned with surveillance, And that as a management tool, it's very excessive invasion of privacy and so on. And that's not the direction that we should be going to with technology. It should be shared prosperity and beneficial to all. But we have to not default to a set of management techniques that are just highly invasive and diminish the flexibility and autonomy that people should expect if they're working remotely. And so that's a cautionary note. I just wanted to say that respond to this question of like the surplus of meetings and your point that a lot of these meetings could be avoided if we were physically in the same place, because I don't want to schedule a meeting for 5 minutes just to ask somebody a question. That's sort of rude. As a manager, you need to take a half an hour. So then you end up 3 back-to-back Teams meetings for like about 10 minutes of work. And I do think the hybrid actually eliminates some of that, because you will have that opportunity to have a face-to-face with somebody that could be done really quickly in lieu of. So I do think that is partly, we should be able to reduce the number of meetings, as you say. We're like, what's the point of being?
But we've had more.
We've had so many, and that is partly in response to this huge earthquake in terms of how we're doing our work and seeing, and that brings me back to the question of also needing both upskilling of workers in terms of how to use the technologies, and we're not all at the same level for sure, but also upskilling of managers in terms of what are the new management roles and techniques that we're going to be using if people aren't in the office physically present, and I don't think it's obvious. And I really feel like the management side needs work as well.
Sure.
And we do have to, the technology we experience, apart from the opportunities to video conference and so on, but the other side of the technologies has been pretty extremely bad, I would say.
Great. So, Congressman, I want to ask you about some of the policy implications, whether some of the rules that we had in the past are becoming outdated or obsolete, and whether there should be any changes. But first, I want to remind everybody that we're going to go to questions in just a few minutes. I've got a bunch of them coming in here. It was a hybrid session, of course, so we've got some here coming in online, but I want to give first preference to those of you who are in the room. So I think there's some mics. We'll go around, but let's go to Congressman Meuser first, and tell us a little bit about what you're looking at in Congress.
Yeah, I think we got to be concerned about a point-and-click society, and I'll get into some of the things we're doing. I mean, if you've got people not where they used to be within the towns, they're not buying from the local stores, they're pointing and clicking for all purchases. Very often they're purchasing, maybe they're saving some money, but they're bringing in everything from China or Asia, and not to pick on China, I mean, they set themselves up to be that source, but then we run into all these supply chain problems, and that's largely because of the reliance on certain goods from certain countries like China. So if we no longer have the need for Main Street and we're just purchasing online, we're losing more than just the. And now society's going to move in the direction it's going to move. You're not going to have government telling you what to do. But I'm particularly concerned about small business, because small business can't keep up with the investments in technology that larger companies can, and just hire a phone bank system for their customer service needs in any part of the world that they'd like to. They need people there. There's also something in small business called the WIP principle, whatever it takes, right? When you got 5, 6, 7 people in a business, one person's not there, those other people got to do their job. I mean, it's all hands-on. So, and so small business is already suffering. I'm on the Small Business Committee. Small business in the U.S. is at an all-time low for confidence of will the future be better? Will we have a recession?
Wow.
They believe we will. Workforce shortages, higher taxes, less customers. They're busy because they can't get enough workforce.
Right.
And guess where they're losing the workforce to? People who want to work from home and work online. I mean, there's a real rise for that. That's where they want to go. They don't want to come in and do that labor. And that doesn't make somebody a bad person. It makes them interested in what other careers are available. But it's really impacting not just Main Street and retailers, small manufacturers, larger manufacturers. So what we've got to do is, and again, I'm on the Small Business Committee, is assure that we give like 100% capital depreciation, for instance. That's very important for particularly for small business, and maybe it should even be just targeted, so it's not as much of a fiscal impact on small businesses, because it's they're really 60 in my district, 70% of the private employees work for private industry, the private sector work for small business. So if we do away with that, and then you get into the three or four manufacturers controlling an entire sector, that's not good either, right? If you make it so difficult for entry into for new competitors. All right.
Antitrust, or what would you do about that?
But what we need is to allow entrepreneurship. We need to allow market entry. We can't burden a small business where it's just not worth it with regulations and taxes, and also workforce. Just sticking to that, and that's largely where a lot of this hybrid, as I stated, can go. So we just got to be cognizant of that from a legislative standpoint. And again, that's just another reason to fortify small businesses best we can, during this
transition.
Serious transition.
Yeah,
correct.
Absolutely. Great. So I know we have some questions. So I think right over here. So just say your name and a
sure.
brief question. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Andy Popink, JLL. I have 3 comments and then a question, so I'll do quickly.
Okay, try to keep it just to a minute or less.
Yeah, the pandemic accelerated this trend of individuation or focus on the individual, and I think there's risk, cultural and productivity risk, in the term hybrid and how it's so focused on the individual. I actually prefer the term elastic work, because what we do with an individual or a team has an impact on the rest of the organization. And I would love to see us evolve to that kind of thinking. Number 2, the points on communication and expectations of managers, spot on, but we also have to educate the workers and the individuals, and communicating expectations on how we do that is critically important. What are the rules for how we're going to work? And then the third one, and really the question, is around polling and surveying. And you talked about this. One of the failures and risks I saw early in the pandemic was we were polling people about coming back to a work environment that they had no idea what it was going to look like. And as you said, it's going to continue to evolve. We're Series 2, Episode 3, but when we're asking them to come back, they're still thinking about Series 2, Episode 2 or 1, and we need to find ways to pull that out. So the question is, how do we pull that out in the surveying and polling with the exhaustion of over-surveying that we have on people? How do we get to that really the heart of what works for them?
Do you want to take that, Lynda?
Yeah, I think those are all really interesting points you've made. Just the question on individuals' capacity to know what they want. I think this is a really important question. And we know, for example, on studies of happiness, that actually humans find it really difficult to know what's going to make them happy. They know the point that they're happy, but they can't predict it in advance. So I've got a lot of sympathy with your idea, which is to say people actually don't know what they want until they do it. And we know, for example, on the studies of leadership, that people act their way into leadership. They don't think their way into it. So this question of action is really important. So the point that I would make 2 points from what you've just said. The first is, I absolutely agree with you about managers. And I think managers, we've often, especially a WEF thing, managers, they're the frozen middle. If only leaders could say what they wanted and somehow it could be percolated down. I think actually the pandemic has shown that managers are absolutely crucial. And we know from data, particularly from the technology firms, that teams that thrived, it was because their managers had one-to-one meetings with them and were empathic. So we know so that's definitely the case. So my view is that we're in a period of intense experimentation at the moment. I don't think we know where we're going to get to. I really take the point, Christy, that you made earlier about predictable schedules. That's one thing that people really want, and that means that we have to we have to design work to bring in some sort of predictability around. To your point, Congressman, about people leaving, I know from the hospitality sector that people are leaving because they don't want unpredictable schedules. Hospitality is a very unpredictable. So, this is a really important moment. There's a lot of experimentation because actually we don't know what we want until we've done it. So we're going to learn by doing. Yeah.
Great. Well, this question about managers is something that's really important. So, in fact, the most upvoted question online was about the role of the manager. The question is, someone wise once said that office work exposes the worker and homework exposes the manager. So I'd like to hear more on this issue of how managers can cope with this. What are some of the new ways they need to think about interacting? Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to add to that. I mean, different aspects, right? One is at least what we're doing at Workday, right? We're providing them training around, ensuring more the well-being and understanding what that means for, for employees. Clearly, diversity and inclusion is very important for us, where we're trying to provide some training and capabilities in terms of what that means. And of course, we bring that to our products in terms of being completely non-biased from that perspective. But as well, just the understanding on this new world of work, as I was saying before, how do you think about those moments that matters? And we're trying to create a space where people are collaborating in terms of what's working from a managerial level, but as well from a peer-to-peer level. Because, as we were saying as well, people learn a lot from their peers. And today, even though there is a reference on their manager, most of the things happening many times when we bring teams together with different skills on projects, they come from different reporting lines in terms of management. So there's not just one kind of single point of looking on your manager, but it's looking across horizontal on the organization, right? So let's coach and make sure that we have an environment where they can share where is it working in terms of creating these meaningful moments when people are together, and how that is working out.
Great. So I saw there are a number of hands here. So right over here, this young lady here.
Thank you. Nathalie Paladichev, Canadian Pension Fund. I've heard that California was considering a 4 days week work. What do you think about it? Is it the Series 5 of the Netflix?
Okay, great. Maybe Christy, you want to take that first, and then we'll go to Congressman.
There is a workshop on that topic later tomorrow. Yes, I'll mention that. I think that there's a lot of experimentation around that, around that topic. So I don't know that, there's experimentation, and some workers really want that, and some workers, don't think that they earn enough money. It really depends on from where you are in the global economy. I mean, it does tend to come from Europe. You see it quite a bit, a demand for a 4-day work week, and ideally we should be headed there. There's no question about that.
4-day work week with 8-hour days or 10-hour? Is it? How is it?
I don't think anyone's asking for 4 10-hour days.
No, okay. So it'd be short.
You occasionally hear that, but that's not really. It's either going to a shorter work week, so 32 hours, 35 hours, maybe over 4 days, something like that. You've seen experimentation with it. I think in the Swedish public. I think Sweden's done a lot of experimentation with it. I think it is the norm for public workers in Sweden. I'm not positive. So I think there's a lot of data showing that workers are really productive over 4 days. There's no question that, and so that will unfold, over time. And it's not something we at Uni have put a lot of emphasis on right now, and that's partly because we're global. And for many workers around the world, the key agenda right now is lifting their standards so they have a living wage and they have social protection, and in many sectors, frankly, it's increasing their hours. There's so many part-time workers who would prefer to have part-time, who would prefer full-time work, and so on. So there's another set of problems we're more focused on, but it sounds like it.
So, Congressman, as I mentioned, you'd also have started a small business, so you have also that perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a business is going to do what it needs to do to maximize its output while keeping its employees happy and being a great place to work. If that is what can work for that particular industry, I came from the 20 years in the home medical equipment industry. Deliveries, need, respiratory, we did power chairs and things of that nature. So if a customer needs you there on Friday and you say, hey, we're only working 4 days a week, you're probably not going to retain that customer. Now, what you could do is you could have rotating employment, right? Or some hybrid. Just be aware, be alert on that Friday. So again, it really comes down to the business. I don't think government has any place in setting any such restrictions. My own view.
Okay, another question. How about in the far back over there?
Can you speak a little bit about what you
We only have like
envision?
5 minutes left, so let's keep the
Okay,
questions
just
and the comments short. We'll try and get
What do you
in.
envision the office space to be in hybrid? Because there's been an increase in intolerance, like I don't like your food, I don't like how you chew, I don't like, that kind of thing. And so I think people have sort of lost that ability to get along. And I wonder, the collaborative space you mentioned, so how do you see that maybe changing or being better?
Who would like to take that?
I'm happy to start.
Go ahead, Lynda.
I think it's a really important question. I'm just thinking about one of the ways that Fujitsu looked at it at the very beginning of the pandemic. And what they said is we're going to build 3 types of office. The first type is an office really near somebody's house. And this is mostly for Tokyo people. So often in a train station where you can just go in and know you've got a really good internet connection, you've got a printer, and you can work on your own. The second type of office we're going to build, which also reduces, and that's all about reducing the commute, by the way, and getting people out of their apartments, which are very small in Tokyo. Second type was where you could actually meet somebody, so you could have a Teams meeting where 6 of you get together. And then the third type is the type which they're going to redesign and making it much more creative, where people come together for creative activities. I think it's that level of intentionality that we're going to need.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. I'd love to read more about that. Let's get some more questions in quickly. There's one right here in the front.
Yeah, so
I'll get the mic here and just say who you are. Yeah.
Kathy Bloomgarden, Ritter Finn. The cohort desires for careers are really quite different, and Gen Z coming into the workforce really wants to start up their own enterprises. They want a lot of choice. How do you create a large company infrastructure when you think about redesigning work that's going to really encourage people to find that in a large company?
Who'd like to take that?
Not sure I understood the question properly.
It's
Sorry,
about
I didn't.
If you have different
Sorry about that.
generational cohorts, I'm not big on generational
cohort.
cohorts, which is why I'm not going to
Okay.
answer the question, but maybe you are.
To be honest, we don't see that much difference in terms of the flexibility kind of expectations from the younger generation to the, let's say, more mature generation. So there's been quite alignment there. The other thing that is interesting as well, the younger generation as well, they want to have some sort of hybrid, at least as a preference, because they understand that there are some social behaviors and things that they need to learn and on board, and learn from peer to peer, and when they are together with other people in person, in an office, or in an offsite. So it's not like we see big differences between one and the others on the cohorts.
Congressman Meuser?
I'll just add, like an old guy like me dealing with the 20-somethings and everything, ask a lot of questions, right? Get their feedback, make it part of the plan, make them own it, still set goals, goals that are mutually agreed upon, and we got to hit these goals under this design. If that doesn't work, but ask a lot of questions, get their feedback, and let them be part of the plan.
Yeah, I think this is an area where just a lot more research is needed. I mean, I've heard anecdotally a different perspective. One CEO was talking to me just recently about how he did a pulse of his own workforce, and the older people with families were happy to be working at home, but some of the 20-somethings, they were missing the community. They actually found work, and you mentioned some people got married in your kind of business. That was a place where they came in and met people. They didn't want to be sitting at home in their apartments, and I can imagine in some of the small apartments in Tokyo.
Part of the answer as well, the office space was not ideal, right? They're sharing with other colleagues. I mean, we've been having
so
internet speeds are not great. I mean, it's kind of
something to be
different
interesting to
starting
study a little
point.
more. I think we have time for one more really quick question, if there is one. Yeah, right over here. Just real quick, though. We're just almost out of time.
Thank you. I'm Snehal Shah. I'm a professor in Mumbai in MBA school. My question is, as we focus on moments that matter, how do you maintain the culture? Because that's so important. How do you maintain the culture of the organization?
Yeah, I think you have to be very intentional about your culture, right? What that represents to you. So clearly, what we do in creating on those moments that matter, we try to ensure that we have cultural ambassadors, people that have been with us long and understand what that means, and it's really creating those interactions where they see, that empathy, that compassionate leadership, those values that they represent on the company, and really we're feeling much more comfortable maintaining that culture on a hybrid world that potentially we were feeling before, right? we had those moments of celebration and rewarding. So we are significantly guided by our values. We were during the pandemic, and we continue today. Number one is employees, our core value number one, so we try to put the focus at the center of the people we have. From a technology perspective, as I say, we have great insights on their sentiment. I get like 7,000 comments every week. Not that I read them all, but there are good tools today at least to, pick on words that are, creating trends and segregations from one and the other. So, they give us great guidance in terms of what we should be doing on maintaining that culture. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think this has been amazing to hear from these experts here about some of the big challenges, but also the big opportunities we're seeing. Sometimes people and organizations get stuck in their ways, and this shock to the system has been tragic in many ways, but we can look to it as an opportunity to reinvent the way work gets done. And I think we'll ever go back to exactly the way things were done before the pandemic. We have an opportunity to do things in ways that are more productive, more innovative, preserve culture, and preserve community. It's a work in progress, but it's great to see that people like you are all thinking about it very much. So thank you, Lynda, Chano, Christy, and Congressman Meuser. Thank you very much.